our model came about as kind of trying to do something a little bit different, which is, and the way this was explained to me once is all models put you in this role of being a technology god, where you are specifying this will be the technology pathway. And when we hit that technology pathway, then we will have this many dollars of savings and this many lives saved and so on. And we kind of said, and the questions we were getting from policymakers was like, well, how do we get from A to B? Like, B sounds great, but we don't know what to do. We're going to be out there deploying the technology. What are the policies available to us that will get us there? So our model is really oriented around, as a person using the model, you're not saying, I'm going to get to this technology outcome. You're saying, I'm going to put on this policy. I'm going to put on a subsidy for solar and wind. I'm going to put on a subsidy for distributed solar. I want to set a floor for sales for electric vehicles. And then you see where you land and you iterate. And so it's a learning exercise, but more importantly for policymakers, it actually helps instruct them on how to get to California's targets or New York's targets.
Welcome back to Renewable Rides. Our guest today is Robbie Orvis, Senior Director of Modeling and Analysis at Energy Innovation, Policy and Technology. Robbie leads the firm's modeling program, which has built and deployed the Energy Policy Simulator across more than a dozen countries, and they've even made the tool open source. He's the lead author of Designing Climate Solutions, a policy guide for low-carbon energy. And his team's recent analysis of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act put a very specific number on what gutting clean energy tax credits actually costs. Wholesale electricity prices are going to be up 74% by 2035. We want to understand what that means for businesses that are actually buying power and what, if anything, they can do about it. Robbie, welcome to the show. Hey, Robbie, thanks for joining us. As we like to do with all of our guests, I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So let's kick off with, what are you passionate about, either personally, professionally, both?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan and Gareth. It's great to be on today. What am I passionate about? Well, of course, other than trying to get sleep with two young kids, I'm passionate about trying to address climate change. That's why I've landed in the career I'm in and how I've gotten to this point. And what I'm really hoping that, success with clean energy technology helps us with. The other thing I'm passionate about is soccer. I played my whole life. I still play every Thursday night. I protect that time like it's sacred. And I'm really excited for the World Cup. Really looking forward to seeing that play out in North America, and planning to be more unproductive than usual for a few weeks there.
Nice. It's coming up quick. What'd you think of the game on Saturday?
I didn't catch it. Again, the two kids make it hard. But I saw the result, and there's a few of those games I want to go back and watch. Champions League final being among them.
Yeah. What are your predictions for the World Cup? I see a lot of the predictors are saying Portugal, which I'm a bit surprised about.
I know. I saw that like EA Sports, they run FIFA,
Yep.
and just see who comes out, and Portugal is the most likely this year. Gosh, I don't know. It does seem like they have a pretty strong team. I'm always kind of pulling for Croatia. Not that I think they actually have it, but Luka Modric is one of my all-time favorite players, so I kind of secretly root for them. I don't know. It would be great to see Harry Kane win a World Cup. I'm a big Harry Kane fan, so maybe England can pull it out this year.
Love it. I'd love to see that as well.
I'll bet.
Well, so on the clean energy, sustainability side of things, like we actually all share an environmental science background by education, but like where do you think that came from? You've got young kids, but it's got to stem something from far before that.
Yeah. So in high school, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita happened when I was in high school, and my school had a senior thesis project. So as seniors, we had to do a year-long research project. And that was right around the time of those hurricanes. So I kind of became interested in what caused those and the connection with climate change, and actually, came across some of they're now more well known, but some of the materials around Exxon kind of knowing about climate change and trying to bury it years and years and years ago before it was kind of part of the modern media landscape. And that really just triggered my interest in climate and extreme weather and the energy suppliers, energy system. And from there, I went on to, work. I worked as an intern during the Waxman-Markey cap and trade bill, which I guess, not so bad to just be there for a summer, get in, watch it get passed in the House, and then get out before it died in the Senate. But that really triggered my interest in continuing to work on climate and clean energy.
So where did your career go from there, Robbie? How did you get into the role you're doing today? What was the path? And can you describe then what you're focused on as a priority in your current role?
Yeah, so I was a congressional intern with the Natural Resources Defense Council during the summer of 2009 when Waxman-Markey went through the House. And after that, I kind of knew I wanted to go into environmental science and policy and law. And after I graduated from UC Berkeley and I moved to DC, and I worked at a group called the Environmental Integrity Project, which is kind of like a nonprofit environmental law firm, and worked on regulatory issues like Clean Air Act permits, Clean Water Act permits for refineries and power plants, and found that work really interesting and did a ton of data work, right? Like trying to look at how they test the power plant stacks for emissions and what it means for how they get their permits, and what they're allowed to emit and what they're not allowed to emit. And I came away from that thinking, this is really interesting and I like the data science of it, and I don't want to go to law school anymore. After working there for a couple of years, it's really important to have smart attorneys working on this stuff. It's just not what I wanted to be doing. And so I went back to school and went to the Yale School of Forestry and got a master's in environmental management. And coming out of that was looking to do something either in the private sector. That was back when O-Power was this like rising star, and everyone wanted to go work at O-Power. I did not land a job there, but I did land a job as a policy analyst at Energy Innovation, which is the think tank I've been at since, and came in working on energy systems modeling and then also power sector policy. And just we at the time were building kind of like a first of its kind energy policy model that I came in and was supporting. And as that work kind of took off and grew, I ended up taking over that program. And so now our team does a bunch of different research, but my team is really focused on building these energy systems models to understand what the impact of policy is on deploying clean technology, on consumer costs, affordability, health. And we do that in the US at the national level, at the state level, and we do it all over the world: China, India, Europe, Canada, Mexico, Indonesia, lots of different countries where, the clean energy technology breakthroughs and costs are now at a point where policymakers are thinking about how can we deploy this stuff at scale? What types of benefits can it bring? How do we do that in a way that's most efficient? So that's kind of what we're focused on doing, is working with those policymakers and regulators to try and help them understand the options they have and how to sort through all those options.
It's amazing. When we think about energy systems, Robbie, we're thinking about behind the meter systems for commercial industrial customers. When you're thinking about an energy system, what size and scale are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. The models we have are typically, we track distributed and utility scale systems, but we certainly don't go into the level of detail or technical detail or systems detail that, once you're talking about putting, steel on the ground, you have to think about, and the power systems management and stuff. So we're taking more of a macro picture. We try and capture some of those important dynamics, but I think I am very happy to say, like, we don't have one model. This is not one ring to rule them all. This is not one model to rule them all. We have things our modeling does well. And if you want to go look at like a power flow model for on-site, distributed energy or storage, like you should find a model that's made to do that, not use something that's way too high level for that.
So what would you describe as being the value and impact of your model? Like, what is your sweet spot? How do you create value for the market?
Yeah. So we have a couple of things we do. The first thing is just like for folks who are new to it, there's a lot of different energy and climate models out there. And there's kind of some different standard ways they work. A lot of them just pick what is the least cost mix of technologies to get you from A to B or to meet energy demand. Others of them, they'll have like an explicit target they're trying to meet, and so they'll find the pathway there. And in some other cases, it's all bottom up. So you are telling the model, I want this many heat pumps and I want this many air conditioners. And our model came about as kind of trying to do something a little bit different, which is, and the way this was explained to me once is all models put you in this role of being a technology god, where you are specifying this will be the technology pathway. And when we hit that technology pathway, then we will have this many dollars of savings and this many lives saved and so on. And we kind of said, and the questions we were getting from policymakers was like, well, how do we get from A to B? Like B sounds great, but we don't know what to do. We're going to be out there deploying the technology. What are the policies available to us that will get us there? So our model is really oriented around, as a person using the model, you're not saying, I'm going to get to this technology outcome. You're saying, I'm going to put on this policy. I'm going to put on a subsidy for solar and wind. I'm going to put on a subsidy for distributed solar. I want to set a floor for sales for electric vehicles. And then you see where you land and you iterate. And so it's a learning exercise, but more importantly for policymakers, it actually helps instruct them on how to get to California's targets or New York's targets, not just saying this is what the target should be, or this is the deployment that should be because it's the cheapest thing. And so I think we really help bridge that gap, right? And acknowledging like that is one of the real value adds of the model. And then, don't use it to do a reliability system analysis for your planning, right? Use a power flow model to do that, but really helping understand what the options are, where they can get you, and what some of the first order benefits from those types of policies are. That's kind of where our sweet spot is.
And so for like, if we were to focus in here on the US, you said both at a federal level, but also at a state level, what are some of the, I guess, insights that a policymaker at either the federal or state level is gonna gain from this, and how can they then act upon that to impact the market and the way that the market's acting?
Yeah. So couple of examples. One is, we did a lot of work, as did a lot of other groups, around the Inflation Reduction Act when that was kind of moving through Congress. And so one of the things we were able to do is like almost in real time, as you saw new bill text coming out, is tweak the model settings and say, okay, if this subsidy goes from $100 to $75, what does that imply for how much will be deployed? Or, if you cap the electric vehicle incentive at a household income of $150,000 instead of $100,000, how many more EVs does that get you? So to my knowledge, that like our experience and other groups that were involved in the Inflation Reduction Act, analysis, that was like a pretty novel idea, like this real-time analytics in the moment to try and shape things so that we get the best bang for the buck. And so, that is one way in real time you can kind of gain those insights in when they're valuable in the moment.
And are policymakers actually using them when they're deliberating in Congress to kind of say, hey, here's why I'm making my argument this way, because this is how it waterfalls out over the coming years?
Yeah, I think at some point it all goes into the sausage making machine, right? And you can just see what comes out the other end of it. But certainly, there were instances, there were a few different groups working in real time with different policymakers, and you saw like on the floor during debate, members of Congress would reference research from a variety of different groups that was like basically coming out weekly, as a reason for pushing for one policy over another. I mean, you saw it again during the One Big Beautiful Bill Act as it moved through Congress. I mean, you had conversations happening about the impact to bills and rates that might shake out from scaling back those incentives and what it implied. And that, who knows whether or not that helped get something that was better at the end than what otherwise could have happened. But, you saw it at least being discussed and shared around with different policymakers.
And you bring up the One Big Beautiful Bill, Robbie. It's definitely angled more towards making renewables more challenging, sort of more focus on fossil fuels. And you kind of publicly stated that that's going to have a price impact. For our audience and CFOs and finance people listening to this, can you just explain the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill as you see it, the current approach to the market dynamics, and how you'd perceive that to impact people going forward from a energy cost and predictability standpoint?
Yeah, and it's gotten more nuanced as more guidance has come out. But to start at a high level, the Inflation Reduction Act had tax credits, a whole bunch of tax credits, but for power sector in particular, it transitioned to technology neutral investment and production tax credits called 45Y and 48E. And those were going to extend until the later of 2032 or when the grid reached 80% decarbonization, which in our modeling took it well into the 2030s and usually into the 2040s. And those tax credits were significant. If projects hit all of the bonus criteria, you're talking about, in some cases, 50% or more of a project's CapEx being covered by the tax credits. And so all the models across different groups basically saw this huge surge in deployment over the next 10 plus years that helped basically bring the grid down to that decarbonization level and really just unleashed clean energy deployment in the US. And then the One Big Beautiful Bill Act really upends a lot of that. So the credits terminate now effectively in 2030. So they actually terminate earlier, but there's provisions that are called safe harbor, where if you meet some criteria around beginning construction early enough, you can actually get like a 4-year window to actually complete that project. And so that's having like two interesting consequences. So in the near term, a lot of models actually show that renewables deployment is increasing relative to the Inflation Reduction Act. As developers see that end date coming near and pull forward those projects to sneak them in under the deadline and take advantage of the credits. But after that, you see this pretty big fall. Some models show it as more precipitous than others. Our latest research is kind of showing a pretty significant fall, but it comes back fairly quickly. It's just the consequence of pulling those projects is there's like a little bit of a delay then catching up. So the first thing is that trend has evolved over the last year as Treasury has issued new guidance and developers, and I'm very curious for your all thoughts on this as well. But what I've heard is that as the guidance has offered a little bit more clarity, especially the big developers with big balance sheets have been able to basically go out and buy those panels, particularly, or storage in some cases, and make that available so they can hit those timelines. But then after that, there's a little bit, there's that fall I was talking about. At the same time, in the last year, the conversation on AI and data centers has totally upended things, right? And so I think there's a couple of other factors that are really complicating the answer to this question. So one is, the data center build out, how quickly will that happen? And will it materialize to the level that some of the utilities and grid operators are saying? And that matters because those data centers will have to be powered. And so to some degree, the more of them there are, the more renewables we're likely to see get deployed, because that's one of the main things that can be built to power those data centers. And on that topic, the second question is, how are those data centers powered, right? So there's this grid scale for utility scale gas plants, which is really what is built from a dispatchable perspective in the US. There's a global shortage basically in the supply chain right now, right? And so if you want to go buy a new gas turbine and you go to, GE or someone else, they'll say, okay, see you in 7-8 years to get your turbine. And so I think a lot of us, myself included, were thinking, well, gosh, that just means they're going to have to go out and do solar and storage or wind and storage if you can get your permits. But what I wasn't expecting and what we're seeing is all this behind the meter gas with the data centers, right? Where they're taking like old jet engines, basically anything they can find that can produce power. And I live in Northern Virginia, and I was just reading an article about how we're all breathing in the diesel generator fumes now that all these data centers are producing, because they're just searching for any power they can find to power the data centers. The cost is not an issue. So that is a really, like, for understanding the evolution of the grid, how many of those types of data centers are there really that are doing these behind the meter things? How are they going to scale? What's going to happen when the supply chain shortage eases up and they're able to get access to batteries or interconnect to the grid? Just a lot of things that are throwing a lot of curveballs at folks like me trying to understand what it all means. I think the one thing we can be fairly confident of is this surge in demand from data centers and electrification, coupled with the loss of the tax credits, coupled with the supply chain issues for gas, and then also how damn difficult it is to build stuff at scale in the US, means that rates are going up. Any one of these things on their own might be able to push them up, but we're kind of right now at this confluence of things that's really, having us stare down rates that are going to continue going up for some time.
So certainly, and that's actually what I was wanting to dig in with you is I think at one point you had quoted between now and 2035 wholesale rates going up. What was it, 74%? Maybe that's changed since the publishing of that stat, but I'd be curious, kind of as you look forward in between now and 2030 or now and 2035, what that's expected to do, because that's impacting a lot of businesses' bottom line.
Yeah, right. And so just to, like, the wholesale rate is a subcomponent of the retail rate, which is what people pay. But what's interesting is that all three components are at the moment going up, and actually one of the biggest contributors, if you look at the latest data on retail rates, is actually distribution system costs, which I gather is, like, a lot of utilities have kind of underinvested for many, many, many years. And now with the data centers and electrification, there's this need. I think the need has a band on it, but there's a need to make a lot of investment in the distribution system to harden it and prepare it for all this new load. And so we're seeing, and then we know it's hard to build transmission, and transmission is expensive. So we've gone from this era of flat load growth, not really needing to heavily invest in the distribution and transmission system, or needing to, but not investing in it, to all of a sudden we've now got all three, generation, transmission, distribution costs going up. So the retail rate increase we saw was markedly lower than the wholesale rate. But at a high level, in the markets where we have wholesale power markets, so the power is traded and the marginal last most expensive unit sets the price. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, when you get all of that clean stuff being deployed, there's a lot of hours where you have a situation like in California or Texas, where you have prices coming down to zero or even going negative. And so you're going from that to a situation where the marginal unit is now $30, $40, or $50 per megawatt hour in those hours, because there's a lot less solar and wind being deployed. So what our modeling was showing is that loss of all of that clean just dramatically pushes up the wholesale price because of the way those markets work. It's different in vertically integrated states where they're just getting cost recovery and it's not price setting at the margin. But that is, that is something we were seeing in the modeling, and to the point, the number was so large, we like triple checked it, because we were like, that's a really big increase. But you're going from zero or negative if you have wind and solar plants taking a production tax credit of $30 a megawatt hour, and you're swinging that all the way to $30 or $40, $50 per megawatt hour in the other direction.
And is this happening essentially the same across all regions of the U.S., or are there particular areas that are going to be impacted more than others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's location specific, but one of the things about the tax credits is they help make projects economic where they otherwise wouldn't be, right? So you can take a solar facility that might have a 15% capacity factor as opposed to 25, and it pencils, whereas without it, it might not, right? So that's really why, and so the regions vary. New England has worse solar resources, better wind resources than solar, versus Texas, which is worthy of its own whole conversation about how renewables and storage are just absolutely skyrocketing there. But it varies, but I think the trend is like pretty generally upwards from all of these factors at the same time.
And so as the federal landscape gets either more complex or more uncertain, what are your models showing about state level policies? And do you believe that we'll see more of that and then backfilling some of these gaps? What are your views on state level policy and how it should influence ultimately businesses making decisions around how to protect themselves from these cost escalations?
Yeah, I mean, state policy is always, like, in my view, on the power sector, been more important than federal policy. Federal policy kind of can set these tax incentives and credits, and maybe DOE or FERC can help navigate some of these interstate issues, which are some of the big ones we're seeing now. But at the end of the day, and I think this is like, a lot of people don't necessarily realize this, but the regulatory decisions in a given state are made by a small group of people who compose the Public Utilities Commission in most states. And those people have an extraordinary amount of influence and power over the shape of the energy system. So we always come back to that being such an important body within each state for determining the direction. You have a huge spread. Some states have very sophisticated PUC commissions with staff and funding who can do the types of studies to dig into what they're hearing from utilities. And other states, often in like the South and Southeast, like they're often just taking what the utilities say and they're rubber stamping it. And so, now more than ever, given the just sheer amount of investment that's being contemplated at this moment for utilities, for distribution, transmission, and generation, it's so important for people to be involved as they can be in those PUC processes to make sure that, we're not overspending or gold plating, is a term that's used a lot when we're kind of over investing in the system. Because at the end of the day, the way we set up our utility grid and our utilities is to incent them to build stuff, right? They come out of an era where we were trying to electrify the country, and we decided, let's give them, for good reasons, the regulatory compact, let's give them an incentive to build stuff, which worked great. But we have to make sure that they're not, taking advantage of that mandate now. And so having a well-staffed, well-funded PUC with a stakeholder process that invites discussion and analysis is so important and will help protect against rates going up. And there's some examples of this already where you can see, like, in New York, for example, basically they were able to not fully institute a rate freeze, but they were able to significantly lower Con Ed's rate increase by the government negotiating with them and being like, can't you defer some of these investments for a few years? And what do you know? They came up with a negotiated settlement to do just that. So it shows the importance of having a process that is, involves stakeholders, including, the private sector and government and ratepayer advocates, and getting to a solution that works for everyone.
Well, and I'm curious, we're in this lead up to the midterms. We saw a bit of a shakeup back in November in Georgia on their PUC. Some of the PUCs are elected, some are appointed by state level officials. But how do you see this impacting the upcoming elections? And I ask because I feel like we've been working in energy for quite some time, and I feel like this is the first time where it's like truly
Yeah.
a primary, top 3 level discussion. How do you see it playing out over the coming months?
Yeah, it's the fact that energy affordability is a top 3 issue is wild. And not just gas price. Gas prices are typically the most visible one, but this predates everything happening, predates the the Iran war and all of the follow-on gas price increases. So I think it will dominate. I think a lot of the discussion leading up to the midterms. This will be one of the top issues mentioned. I think you're probably going to hear the same standard arguments for or against renewables that we've been hearing for years. I think in a lot of cases, I don't think analysis trickles into the debate topics. I think a lot of it's dogmatic, but I do think there will be discussion around affordability, and there will need to be, some acknowledgement and some discussion of what is to be done about it. And I'm sure you both agree that one of the really frustrating things is there's so much misinformation out there on energy costs and affordability and drivers. It's and the oil crisis is one that really is like just on the nose on that, because it's seemingly such a simple thing to say the U.S. produces more oil than it consumes, therefore we're totally good. But if you have even like the next level understanding, you see why. Nope, we actually need to import a lot of oil because our refineries aren't set up to use the stuff from here. But these are points that, like, in a little soundbite, right, you can't really get across. So I do think it will be a really important issue leading up to November, and will be interesting to see what different folks are saying about how to tackle it.
Yeah, no, especially in this like global market, it really doesn't matter, doesn't it, how much you can self-produce. You're gonna sell it to the highest bidder unless you mandate it otherwise.
Right. I mean, it's like the phrase I've heard, like, no, this is good for us because oil prices are high. And I've been posting like, no, we don't run a country that we have national oil companies. It's good for the shareholders of those companies, of which our president is a major one. But it's not good for the American public. It's awful for the American public. And so, like, but I think I think the Times or the Washington Post had an article about, like, these are the countries benefiting from the oil crisis, and the U.S. was there. And it's like, no, the company's based there unless they have a sovereign fund or a national oil company. And so, like, but to the point, that is a nuance that's hard to get across in a 30-second soundbite.
Yep. And so, Robbie, to kind of put a bow around that, then, at the end of last year in the energy versus climate, you were trying to describe what's noise and what's fact. We're now months into kind of this year, and a lot's changed. What do you think are the misconceptions and the noise points, and what is factual and interesting and should stand out to business leaders trying to figure out the energy landscape?
I think whatever happens with data centers, like whether we get 2, 4, 6, 10% growth per year, we are in an era, whether it's electrification or data centers, we're in like a fundamentally different paradigm for the grid now going forward. I don't think that's noise. I think the magnitude could be different, but the things that jump out to me from that are that we've now had several of these global incidents where we have fossil fuel price volatility, and even though the U.S. is somewhat insulated from the rise in natural gas prices globally, because we're already maxed out on LNG supply, there's a lot of terminals that are being built, and we still have gas prices that are rising. Which natural gas prices, which is rising. So I think, like, there's a signal there, and we're not really seeing drilling rigs ramp up, right? Like there's this interesting tension between like the price signal and the willingness and desire from investors and rig owners to actually make new operations, right? Like and we saw this before, where there were years of basically running up losses, and then they just recovered it all during the Russian invasion of Ukraine without much significant increase in output. So the signal there is like fossil fuel price volatility is a real thing, and rising fossil fuel prices is a real thing. And could it mitigate? Yeah, but I think we're looking at a period. We're out of the like $2 to $3 per MMBTU for gas for a while, and so that should factor into how private sector is planning to make investments and tethering to when you're choosing between different technologies. Like that is a real thing to consider. So I think that's pretty important. I think that the also just the to the question you just asked, like the whole regulatory setup around utilities and rates, like there's a real focus on that across the U.S. at the state level now, and so I think we're looking at probably some fundamental change to how utilities are going to be working with state regulators going forward. And an offshoot of that is the rising cost of building out new distribution systems and transmission systems. And so those are going to affect rates also going forward. And that I'll come back to that in a minute. And maybe the final piece is we really need to reform how we build stuff in the U.S. or how we can build stuff, right? There's these several different bottlenecks along the system, whether you're going between states or how long it takes utilities to approve interconnection. And that's on the demand side of your data center, but also critically on the supply side. And you see that, I kind of always pick on PJM because they're an easy target, but right, they instituted a price cap in their capacity market because Governor Josh Shapiro basically forced them to because of how high the costs were getting. And they're just kind of indignant that the reason there's not more supply coming on is because the price cap's too low, not that like it takes them 7 years to approve a project. They had this letter a few weeks ago. It was just kind of stunning to read because it doesn't really take any ownership of the problem. So this is happening. There are some operators and utilities addressing this head on, and it should improve. And there may be legislation, permitting legislation or otherwise this year to help with that. But this interconnection challenge is a real problem. And I don't really see any like breakthrough immediately happening. And so if we're in this system where we have this growing demand and it's still so hard to build stuff, there, one logical outcome is prices go up, right? We have high demand, low supply. That's economics 101. That's higher prices. But it also raises the prospect of going kind of off the grid or behind the meter. And I think that making sure that that's happening in a way that's sustainable is going to be really important for state policymakers, especially to consider going forward, because otherwise it will just happen in a completely chaotic fashion.
Yeah. I was just going to add one thing, which is when you're talking interconnection, just to quantify that for our listeners, primarily like these very long drawn out interconnections are for either large supply or large loads in the case of AI data centers. But when we think about the more distributed nature of the, call it 1 to 10, 1 to 20 megawatt, those can be, because of the distributed nature and the lessened impact on the grid, they're not as drawn out, which starts to play into why distributed is a good play.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think exactly. That's the exact. I mean, and you're seeing that, like, we're playing an experiment in real time with data centers moving that direction for exactly that reason.
Yeah. And Robbie, we often see people commenting that it's the deployment of renewables that drives up the price of energy. And I think you're sharing some great insights into it's actually the transmission distribution costs that are becoming the bulk of someone's bill. How do you challenge that mindset when people bring up that concept? And what do your models show in terms of that trade-off of renewables versus transmission distribution? What is the culprit?
Yeah. So the number one expert on this is a guy named Ryan Weiser, who works at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And they put out a series of papers over the last year looking at this exact, he'd probably be mortified knowing I'm talking about this right now, but putting out this like exact analysis looking at across the US, what are the drivers of rate growth, right? He finds it varies a lot on the state. They did not find any statistically significant value of the level of renewables or rate of renewables growth on total rates. They did find, kind of interesting, that states with distributed solar did have a statistically significant correlation because you're passing on those distribution system costs to a smaller number of people. So to the point of distribution costs. And it's kind of like, I mean, I remember years ago, the utility death spiral everyone was talking about, which never seemed to have materialized, but that is kind of the head of that, right? You have the people defecting from the grid, distribution costs are put onto a smaller number of people. In the states that have a lot of renewables that have had rising costs, which is California principally, wildfire recovery costs are the vast majority of those costs. And in fact, the wholesale electricity price has not gone up or driven that. And that California is kind of an extreme example because I don't live there anymore. California has decided to load up the insurance costs and the repayment costs onto people's bills, which was kind of a political decision, right? Maybe in hindsight, not the best one. But that is the primary driver of cost increases. So I think like I look to that paper, which basically says there's no correlation one direction or the other, by the way. They also don't find a correlation between higher renewables and lower rates. But they do disaggregate the generation, transmission, and distribution components. And what you can see is that in a lot of cases, the majority of rate increases are coming from T&D, not generation. And that's like nationally. So again, kind of a nuanced point to be able to push back on someone who's come to a conversation with that. But I think it is very instructive to look at like, that's a nice talking point. Let's look at what's actually happening at each state and try and draw some insights from that. And what it tells us is it's not the level of renewables. Look no further than Texas, which is the leader in the country for wind, solar, and storage, and they're doing just fine.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of your comments around sort of the behind the meter defection and passing on the costs, do you see a future where that is the standard, where most people are generating, storing their own energy, and then those distribution, transmission costs are actually covered by the large load centers? Can you see policy shifting that way, or any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that, and this comes kind of back to the conversation about state public utility commissions, right? So if there's the power to negotiate with the large loads, then possibly they can take, basically what I'm hearing is cost is meaningless to these data centers because it's a small portion of their overall investment. So in states that are kind of like proactive about this and can have strong PUCs that can negotiate with the big data center operators, then they may be able to leverage them to help pay for some of those costs. And, some states, like the load pays for some of that investment. Sometimes the supply pays if you need like a spur line or transmission investment. But it does, if they're coming in and totally disrupting the system, I think there's a perfectly logical reason for having them pay their fair share, or maybe more than their fair share, which sets them up for success in the long run. Also, my concern is that there are a lot of states that don't have that level of sophistication at the PUC. And so I'm worried that if you're a data center operator and you're like, okay, I can go to this state where I'm going to have a protracted 6-month negotiation, I'm going to have to pay $5 billion. I can go to this state where they'll rubber stamp it and I don't have to pay anything. I mean, you know where you're going to go. So this is the concern right now, is that without these, institutions in place and processes for like discovering this information, that this will play out again in a really chaotic way that really just saddles, households with higher bills and is really regressive.
So we've been talking about how these larger loads can increase bills. Do you have any perspective on the potential canary in the coal mine of NV Energy and notifying the residents of Tahoe that they're no longer going to be able to serve them because of some of the diverting power to these large data centers? Is that something that we're going to see more of in the country? And like, that's not just rising costs, but that's like no more power.
Yeah, I did read that. It's fairly alarming. The immediate question I have is, does this have to be approved by the regulator? Because that, I find it hard. And again, we come back to this question on PUCs because, it would be hard for me to envision that a regulator would be like, all right, plan approved. These people are on their own. It may be on a different timeline. But I think it will. I think there's a couple ways it could play out. First of all, it's horrible press for NV Energy. I that alone to me is like, I don't know if they're going to be able to swallow that decision. And I don't think it would take too many examples of that happening. Just, it's such bad press and such a bad look for the data center as well as the utility. That's not like a great thing to like, you don't want to bank on hope that the that the symbolism of doing that is going to stop them from doing it. But that kind of thing could play out. Or, I mean, the more like, maybe more likely one is they can negotiate lower rates, like for the cheaper power from the utilities. And then the utility, we're cross subsidizing sort of the data centers. And I think that is, again, where it just comes down to like, can the PUC stand up to the data centers? But that is the issue. The Tahoe was a South Lake Tahoe NV Energy, right? I mean that, and it's only a year timeline for them to go out and secure new power. Yeah, it's really
it's quite a unique scenario, I think, because Liberty Utilities is the provider to the community, and they source their energy from NV Energy, who apparently has said for years, this isn't guaranteed. So I think it's definitely nuanced, but it's definitely not a good look, like you say.
Yeah, I will bet on the under of that deal happening. Not happening. Yeah, I will bet on the under.
That's
but
good.
like canary in the coal mine. The fact that it's even being out there discussed is alarming.
Yeah, certainly. Last question before we get into the power surge round. There's such a dynamic landscape, so much going on, and it can be hard for particularly people that are not living day in and day out in the energy world. So if you've been brought in, let's say, to the boardroom of a business, it's got 100 manufacturing plants or 100 distribution centers around the country, and they ask you, how should we be thinking about the next 5 to 10 years? And if you were to give us one piece of advice, what is it that we should be acting on now or considering now in order to protect ourselves from the chaos over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Well, I might start by saying go back and look at the last 5 years, right? You've got COVID, war in Ukraine, Iran war, a Congress that can no longer really be trusted to follow through on policy. And think about stability, right? I think one thing we know is that the private sector craves stability. And one thing I've heard a lot is like, I don't want to say this is emblematic of the whole industry, but it's like, forget the tax credits, just give us stability. Just let us know that we can make an investment and we can build it, right? And we'll make it work. So if stability is the coin of the realm, then think about which of your investments give you that stability. Will you have to pay a little bit of a premium now if you're going to do solar and storage or solar gas backup and storage, but it provides you optionality and stability? It might very well be worth that upfront investment to protect against the stability and uncertainty. And so the volatility in the energy market in the last 5 years is crazy because we had a comparatively stable decade before that. And then it's just been whipsaw the last 5 years. So, and I don't like really see a political return to normalcy on the radar. I don't know if anyone does. If they do, I'd love to talk to them. So I think that that ability to plan and have that stability is really important to remain competitive also. And so I would kind of maybe start by saying, what happens if you had made your investment 5 years ago using the assumptions you had at the time, where would you be today?
Yeah. I love that. The predictability is so important, isn't it? I was riding along a road yesterday and I saw an old petrol station or gas station that had shut down. I don't know what year, but the sign was still there and it was showing $1 a gallon. And I think to your point, imagine if you'd have been able to lock in your rates at that. It's the same philosophy for energy, isn't it? As thinking about
those long-term contracts are worth, they can be worth the higher price for that stability, for sure.
Yeah, people don't realize it's like modern day hedging, isn't it? You know, you hedge against gas prices and things like that, but how do you hedge against electricity prices?
Right. Well, and you had like after, was it Uri in Texas? All of those retail providers that went out of business and all of their customers were apoplectic. You know, my rate was $10,000. You know, it's like, well, you were living that unhedged lifestyle, and you know, the tax man came.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. This has been amazing, Robbie. We'd love to finish with a few rapid fire questions. So we'll start with, if you could be any energy technology or technology, what would you be and why?
I would be battery storage right now. It's just to the moon for grid scale storage.
Love it. I'd say it's a popular choice because of the versatility and the importance to where we're headed. You're extremely well read. You're very well written yourself. Where do you get your information? What resources do you go to? Newsletters, podcasts, books that our listeners might be keen to keep up on.
Well, yeah, I usually start my day by reading a handful of things. You know, I read. What do I read? I read E&E News's like morning summary. They have a few different, like Climate Wire, Energy Wire. And that's like, and Politico, Semaphore is a great resource as well. We are privileged enough to have a BNEF subscription, so those folks really aggregate amazing data and information. You know, those are probably some of the ones I start with. I will confess that given all my time is spent on energy, I don't listen to a ton of podcasts on it. Just try and use my brain for something else in those times. But that's kind of the starting list of resources. I tell any new employee on my team or at my company, I say, like, you should really be reading these. I think one other one I would mention that just came across my radar is a group called Climate Exchange. We've worked with them for a bit, but they really like collect state level policy around the country and kind of do a lot of analysis and insights on it. And so it can be really hard to keep track of what's happening at all the states. And that's a great resource for being able to kind of drill down and you have actual like bills that are being tracked and what they mean and stuff. So that's another good one.
That's awesome. And from your own content perspective, any shout outs for the work you're working on or people can access that you've contributed to? Yeah.
Our team is doing amazing work. You can find all of our reports at energyinnovation.org. And so the team I head up, we do a lot of modeling and analysis work. We have a whole other team that's like really in the weeds on sector specific policy. So our colleagues just put out a new, it's kind of like an analytical tool called ITTIM, but it shows all of the energy uses and for different processes in industry and how quickly they can be decarbonized. But the main thing I've been working on lately is we are imminently releasing an update to our national U.S. modeling. And our tool is available online at energypolicy.solutions. You can actually go there and run any of the international models and go play with it. There's hundreds of results you can just view online. It runs in the browser in real time. But that will be our new outlook that actually pulls in the latest forecast for energy demand and costs, and also formally pulls in all of the legislative and regulatory actions that we've seen over the last year and a half. And so you'll see that our outlook is not quite as rosy as it was at the start of last year. But to one of the comments we made earlier, we do still see a lot of renewables being deployed over the next 10, 20 years. Maybe not quite where we were, but that's really the thing I keep coming back to, is that the cost picture for renewables is just changed so dramatically in the last decade that we don't have to have like this green premium conversation anymore for at least for clean tech on the grid. It's there, and it's what's cheapest.
Yeah. And it seems like, based on reading your content and hearing you speak, this is like an inevitable outcome. It's just, how long does it take?
Yeah, I mean, I was pulling together some slides for a variety of different technologies, but looking at the cost curves and the deployment curves for solar, wind, lithium-ion batteries, and EVs. I mean, you were basically at the axis for EVs 10 years ago, and today you're talking about 20 million and growing exponentially sales of EVs globally per year. So it's just it's really like an incredible time for us all to be doing this, because the technology wasn't there 10, 12 years ago, and it's just rapidly emerging. And it's now, for the power sector, it's the cheapest. Solar's the cheapest electricity ever built in the world.
Yeah.
It's only getting cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I love the fact that with or without tax credits, it is the competitive way to go. So bring us home, Robbie. You're obviously a family man. You're in this industry professionally. So in my life, I will have been successful when?
In my life, I will have been successful when I'll just say we no longer need incentives to scale clean energy technology to meet targets for a safe climate future, which gives me sufficient wiggle room in that response.
So good. No, and no, we really appreciate all your work, your team's work. It's so important. Policy is such an important driver of a lot of this, and so thank you. Thanks for joining us and sharing your wisdom with our guests.
Thanks for having me on. It was a great chat.
Cheers, Robbie.
Gareth, what a fascinating conversation. I love digging into the policy side, considering it's such an important lever, but one that sometimes feels like it's a bit out of any one individual's control.
Yeah, I love that they're trying to simplify it and make it understandable. It's open source, which is awesome, in terms of people being able to look at this themselves and run their own scenarios and analysis. And I think that's critical, isn't it, for policymakers, is how do they make these decisions in such a complex system without tools like this to really support them?
Certainly. And just understanding kind of the 5, 10, 15-year knock-on effects of any one of these decisions, because it might be good for the next 6 months or the next election cycle, but is it good? It's good in the long term.
Yeah. And that was kind of the standout for me, Dan, is, when the models are projecting currently, even without some of this volatility and some of the real-time issues that kind of the country's now facing, wholesale electricity prices up 74% by 2035, resulting in electricity rates being up as much as 18%. And that's an average. So that's definitely not going to account for locations where they're going to see more complexity around low growth of AI and all this interesting complexity. So I think that's the key takeaway for me, is for business leaders thinking about this, is can you withstand another 18% rise in energy rates over the next 5 to 8 years or more? And that predictability and volatility piece that he mentioned is really the pain point for many businesses, isn't it? If you can actually plan around this, it makes everything feel a lot more understandable and achievable. But when you don't know whether it's going to be up 5% next year, 10%, what's going to happen the year later, that unpredictability and volatility is not good for business planning and operations. And that's what people have an opportunity to get a handle on and really take control of.
and not be like to the point around do renewables increase the price of electricity, and the finding that distributed energy, those that didn't have distributed energy were experiencing slightly higher prices.
Yeah.
What's stopping folks from being, not subjecting themselves to that? I think for me, just policy volatility is pretty fascinating. We've seen such, he used the term whipsaw the last several years, but we've seen such volatility in energy policy. But then you zoom out a bit more and just kind of macro geopolitical policy and war and military policy is having all kinds of follow-on effects to the broader energy market. And so I think that is certainly here in the U.S. is not showing any signs of slowing, and it's only gonna leave the energy markets feeling this volatile effects, and the best way to hedge against that is to take matters into your own hands. So I appreciated the insights, the resources that they come out with and share and make open and available in public source or open source. We need more folks like Robbie and his team.
Yeah, and I love that this is going to continue to get more and more local and state-based, and we can all influence that. And I think we talked about that in a previous discussion around we have the ability to influence and act on this, so we all need to take note of that.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.